The flickering candle at the window was Clara Thompson's only defense against the encroaching darkness of Pendleton, Oregon, in 1876. Her calloused fingers, moving deftly despite the dim light, pushed the needle through the worn fabric with practiced precision. The small cabin, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cavernous in its emptiness. 6 months a widow, Clara continued her nightly ritual of mending by candlelight to save precious lamp oil for when it was truly needed. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters of the modest homestead that sat on the outskirts of town. Clara paused, her needle hovering mid-stitch as she heard the distinct sound of hoofbeats approaching. Her heart quickened. Visitors at this hour were rare and seldom brought good news. She set aside her sewing and reached for the shotgun her husband David had taught her to use. The weight of it was familiar in her hands as she moved toward the door. The hoofbeats slowed and then stopped. Heavy boots crunched on the gravel outside. "Hello? Anybody home?" A deep, unfamiliar voice called out. Clara steadied her breathing. "State your business," she called back, trying to sound stronger than she felt. "Madam, the name's Caleb Grayson. My horse threw a shoe about a mile back. I saw your light and was hoping I might trouble you for some water and directions to the nearest lodging." Clara hesitated, the shotgun still ready in her hands. "The candle's nearly spent and town's 5 miles east. You'd be better off continuing your journey come morning." A pause. "I understand your caution, madam. I'll just water my horse at your trough if that's all right, and be on my way." Something in his voice, a weariness that matched her own, made Clara lower the shotgun slightly. She had been alone too long, perhaps. The isolation was beginning to wear on her spirit. "Wait," she called out. "I'll light a lamp." She fumbled in the darkness for her supply of matches and the kerosene lamp that sat unused on the table. The match flared to life, and she carefully lit the lamp. Golden light flooded the cabin's main room, illuminating her simple furnishings and the half-mended shirt in her sewing basket. With the lamp in one hand and the shotgun still loosely held in the other, Clara opened the door. The man standing before her was tall, his frame silhouetted against the night sky. As he stepped into the circle of lamplight, she saw a face weathered by sun and wind, but with kind eyes the color of summer sky. His clothes were dusty from travel, but well kept. A cowboy, by the look of him, with a wide-brimmed hat held respectfully in his hands. "Thank you kindly," he said, his eyes taking in the shotgun with a hint of amusement. "I promise I'm no threat to you, madam." "A woman alone can't be too careful," Clara replied, though she lowered the weapon fully now. "You said your horse threw a shoe," Caleb nodded, gesturing toward a chestnut gelding standing patiently nearby. "Name's Rusty. Good horse, bad timing. We've been riding hard from Idaho. There's a blacksmith in town, but he won't be open till morning," Clara said, surprising herself with how easily conversation came after months of speaking to almost no one. "You're welcome to water your horse and—" She hesitated, then continued, "I have some stew left from supper." A genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his features. "That would be mighty kind of you, miss." "Thompson," she supplied. "Clara Thompson." She didn't correct him on the miss. Somehow, Mrs. still felt strange on her tongue when David was no longer beside her. Caleb removed his hat and stepped inside, ducking slightly to clear the doorframe. Clara noticed his movements were careful, as if he was trying not to take up too much space in her home. "You were sewing in the dark," he observed, nodding toward her abandoned work. Clara placed the lamp on the table, casting a warm glow over the cabin. "Saving oil," she explained simply, moving to the stove to reheat the stew. "Smart," he commented, taking in the cabin with a quick glance. His eyes lingered momentarily on the man's boots by the door and the hunting rifle mounted on the wall. but he asked no questions. As Clara stirred the pot, she felt an unfamiliar sensation, the awareness of another person's presence in her space. For months, she had moved through these rooms alone, spoken to herself or not at all. Now the air seemed different, charged with something she couldn't name. "What brings you to Pendleton, Mr. Grayson?" she asked, keeping her back to him as she worked. "Just passing through," he replied. "I've been working cattle drives north from Texas, but I'm looking to settle somewhere. Heard Oregon had good prospects for a man willing to work hard." Clara nodded, understanding the pull of new beginnings. After all, wasn't that why she and David had come west from Missouri 5 years ago? For the promise of something better, something they could build together. Before the fever had taken him and left her alone with their dreams half realized, she ladled the stew into a bowl and set it before him with a piece of cornbread. "It's not much," she apologized. "It's more than I expected," Caleb answered, genuine gratitude in his voice. "Thank you." As he ate, Clara returned to her sewing, finding comfort in the familiar motion of needle through fabric. The lamp's glow made her work easier, and she found herself stealing glances at her unexpected guest. There was something about him that seemed solid, dependable qualities she had valued in David. "You're good at that," Caleb observed between bites, nodding toward her mending. "I've had practice," Clara replied. "I take in sewing from folks in town. It helps supplement things." Caleb's eyes showed understanding. "Your husband's not with you?" he asked cautiously. Clara's hand stilled momentarily. "He passed 6 months ago." "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Thompson," Caleb said quietly, and Clara heard the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she murmured, resuming her stitching. "The fever took many in Pendleton last winter." They fell into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The wind continued to howl outside, and the lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls. Clara finished mending the shirt and reached for another piece from her basket. "The storm's picking up," Caleb noted, glancing toward the window where rain had begun to patter against the glass. "I should see to my horse." "There's a lean-to beside the barn," Clara found herself saying. "Not much, but it would keep him dry." Caleb nodded his thanks and rose, placing his empty bowl beside the wash basin. "I'll tend to him and be on my way." "In this weather?" Clara surprised herself again. "It's a 5-mile ride to town in the dark and rain." She hesitated, then continued. "The barn has a dry loft with fresh hay. You could stay there for the night, continue on in the morning." Caleb studied her face, seeming to weigh her offer. "That's generous of you, Mrs. Thompson. I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition if it's offered freely," she replied. "And it's Clara." A small smile touched his lips. "Clara, then, thank you." After Caleb had gone to settle his horse, Clara sat alone in the cabin, wondering at her own actions. For months she had kept to herself, speaking only when necessary during her infrequent trips to town. Yet tonight she had invited a stranger to stay on her property, had shared her meal and her conversation. When Caleb returned briefly to thank her again, his hair damp from the rain, she handed him a folded blanket and a small lantern. "For the night," she explained. "It gets cold in the barn." "I'm obliged," he said, taking the items carefully. "Good night, Clara, and thank you for the light." He gestured toward the lamp still glowing on her table. "Sometimes seeing clearly makes all the difference." After he left, Clara stood for a long moment looking at the lamp. Its warm glow seemed to chase away more than just physical darkness. For the first time in months, she felt something stir within her, a small, fragile spark of possibility. The morning dawned clear and bright, washing away the storm's remnants. Clara rose with the sun, as was her habit, and set about her morning chores. As she collected eggs from the small henhouse, she found herself glancing frequently toward the barn, wondering if her visitor was still there or if he had continued on his way at first light. Her question was answered when she returned to the cabin to find Caleb at her water pump filling a bucket. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms tanned by the sun. "Good morning," he called, seeing her approach. "Hope you don't mind." "Thought I'd fetch some water before I headed out." Clara nodded, suddenly self-conscious of her plain work dress and hair hastily pinned up. "Of course. Thank you." She noticed he had already chopped a stack of firewood and piled it neatly beside the cabin's door. The small kindness caught her off guard. "You didn't need to do that," she said, gesturing to the wood. Caleb shrugged. "Least I could do for your hospitality." He set the water bucket down near the door. "I'll be on my way soon. Just wanted to make sure Rusty was fit for travel." Clara hesitated, then said, "I was about to make breakfast. You're welcome to share it before you go." Surprise and pleasure flickered across his face. That would be mighty nice. As they sat at her small table, sharing a simple meal of eggs and biscuits, Clara found herself studying Caleb more openly in the daylight. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of laughter as much as hardship. His hands were calloused from work, but his manners were gentle. "How long have you been traveling?" she asked. "Near on 2 years now," he replied, spreading a bit of butter on a biscuit. "After the war, I couldn't settle, kept moving, taking work where I could find it." Clara nodded. She had seen many such men pass through Pendleton, restless souls, carrying the weight of memories they couldn't share. David had been fortunate. His injury early in the conflict had sent him home before the worst of the fighting. "And you?" Caleb asked. "Have you been in Pendleton long?" 5 years, Clara answered. "David, my husband, and I came west after the war. He had family near here once, though they're all gone now." She paused, surprised at how easily she spoke of David to this stranger. "We built this place together." Caleb's eyes held understanding. "It's a good piece of land." 20 acres, Clara said with a touch of pride. "We had plans." She trailed off, the familiar ache of loss tempering her words. "Plans have a way of changing," Caleb offered quietly. "Doesn't mean they're gone forever." Something in his tone made Clara look up and meet his gaze. There was no pity there, only a shared understanding of how life could alter course without warning. After breakfast, Caleb insisted on washing the dishes before he prepared to leave. Clara watched him work, struck by how his presence had temporarily filled the emptiness of her home. Tomorrow she would be alone again, and the thought brought an unexpected hollowness. "If you're still looking for work," she found herself saying, "Pendleton's got a growing cattle operation. The Westland Ranch, they're always looking for experienced hands." Caleb dried his hands on a towel, considering her words. "I might just look into that, thank you." As he saddled Rusty and prepared to depart, Clara handed him a small bundle wrapped in cloth, some biscuits, for the road. His smile warmed his entire face. "You're too kind, Clara Thompson." She shook her head. "Just returning the favor for the firewood and water." Caleb mounted his horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. Looking down at Clara, he tipped his hat. "I hope our paths cross again." "Pendleton's a small town," Clara replied, surprising herself with the hint of hope in her voice. As she watched him ride away, Clara felt something shift inside her, as if the lamp Caleb had lit the night before had illuminated more than just her small cabin. It had cast light on possibilities she had thought extinguished when they laid David in the ground. For the first time in months, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow. 3 days passed, and Clara tried to convince herself she wasn't watching the road for signs of a chestnut gelding and its rider. She focused on her sewing, completing orders for Mrs. Holloway's new Sunday dress, and mending for the Walsh family. The work kept her fingers busy, if not her mind. On the fourth day, Clara hitched her wagon and made her weekly trip into Pendleton for supplies. The small town was bustling with its usual activity, ranch hands gathering at the saloon, women exchanging news outside the general store, children darting between wagons in impromptu games. Clara nodded polite greetings as she moved from the general store to the post office, but kept to herself, as was her custom. Since David's passing, the town's sympathy had slowly given way to gentle encouragement to move on, suggestions of suitable widowers she might consider, offers to introduce her to newcomers looking for a wife. Well-meaning as they were, these overtures only made Clara retreat further into her solitude. As she loaded her supplies into her wagon, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Caleb approaching, his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Thompson," he greeted her formally, aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. "Good to see you again." "Mr. Grayson," she returned with equal formality, though her heart had quickened at the sight of him. "I trust you found what you were looking for in Pendleton." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "As a matter of fact, I did. Took your advice about Westland Ranch. Mr. Westland hired me on yesterday as a cattle hand." "That's good news," Clara said, genuinely pleased. "They're good people, the Westlands." Caleb nodded, then glanced around at the busy street. "I was wondering if I might call on you properly sometime. Perhaps Sunday after church." The unexpected invitation caught Clara off guard. She hadn't attended church regularly since David's funeral, finding the sympathetic glances and whispered comments too much to bear. "I don't usually," she began. "Just for conversation," Caleb clarified quickly. "I enjoyed talking with you the other night. It's been a while since I've had such honest company." Clara felt a blush rising to her cheeks, aware of Mrs. Patterson watching with undisguised interest from the millinery shop doorway. Tomorrow, rumors would fly through Pendleton about Clara Thompson entertaining callers. Yet, looking at Caleb's open expression, Clara found she didn't care as much as she might have expected. "Sunday, then," she agreed. "After the service." Caleb's smile broadened. "I look forward to it." He replaced his hat and tipped it slightly. "Good day, Mrs. Thompson." As Clara drove her wagon home, she felt lighter than she had in months. The thought of Sunday brought a nervous anticipation that both surprised and unsettled her. Was she ready for this, for companionship, for the possibility of something more? Would it dishonor David's memory to welcome another man's presence in her life? These questions accompanied her through the rest of the week as she tended her small vegetable garden, fed her chickens, and continued her sewing. By Sunday morning, she had reached no clear answers, only the certainty that she wanted to see Caleb Grayson again. The church service passed in a blur. Clara sat in her usual spot near the back, aware of the curious glances cast her way when Caleb took a seat a few rows ahead. Pastor Williams spoke of renewal and second chances, and Clara couldn't help feeling the message was meant specifically for her. After the service, as congregants gathered on the church steps, Caleb made his way to her side. He looked different in his Sunday best, still unmistakably a cowboy, but with an earnestness that touched her. "May I walk you home?" he asked. Clara nodded, aware of the speculative looks they received as they set off together down Pendleton's Main Street. She had walked this road countless times, first with David and then alone, but today it felt different, as if she were seeing the familiar buildings and faces through new eyes. "You look lovely today," Caleb said as they left the busier part of town behind. Clara smoothed her best-dressed dark blue calico that David had always said brought out the color of her eyes. "Thank you," she replied simply. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. When they reached the fork in the road that led to her homestead, Clara surprised herself by asking, "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Caleb's smile was answer enough. The afternoon passed with unexpected ease. Clara prepared a chicken she had been saving for a special occasion, while Caleb helped with tasks around the property that she had been putting off, fixing a loose board on the porch, adjusting the well's pulley system, reinforcing the chicken coop. As they worked together, conversation flowed naturally. Caleb told her about growing up in Virginia, his service in the Confederate cavalry, and his wanderings after the war. Clara spoke of her childhood in Missouri, meeting David at a church social when she was 18, and their decision to seek a new start in Oregon. "We wanted children," she confessed as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "It just never happened for us," Caleb nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My sister had the same disappointment. It's a hard thing." "It was," Clara agreed, "especially for David. He would have been a wonderful father." She paused, then added softly, "He was a good man." "I've no doubt of that," Caleb replied. "He built you a fine home." Clara looked around at the small homestead, the cabin David had expanded room by room, the barn he had raised with help from neighbors, the orchard of young apple trees they had planted together. "Yes," she said, "he did." As dusk deepened into evening, Caleb rose to take his leave. "Thank you for today, Clara. I haven't felt this settled in a long time." Clara walked with him to where his horse was tethered. "Will you be staying in Pendleton long?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Caleb adjusted Rusty's saddle before answering. "I signed on with Westland for the season, at least." He turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "With your permission, I'd like to call on you again." Clara took a deep breath. 6 months ago, she would have refused, closed the door on any possibility of connection. But something had changed when Caleb lit that lamp in her darkened cabin. He had illuminated not just her physical space, but something within her as well. "I'd like that," she replied softly. Caleb's smile in response was like the sunrise, gradual, then brilliant. He mounted his horse and tipped his hat. "Until next time, Clara Thompson." As she watched him ride away, Clara felt a sense of anticipation replace the familiar loneliness. Whatever this was between them, friendship, or the beginnings of something more, it felt like a new chapter opening in a book she had thought finished. Through the warm summer months, Caleb became a regular visitor at Clara's homestead. He would ride out on Sunday afternoons after church, sometimes bringing small gifts, a jar of honey from the general store, wildflowers gathered along the road, a new spool of thread when he noticed her supply running low. They fell into comfortable routines. Clara would cook Sunday dinner, and afterward, they would sit on the porch talking as the day faded. Caleb would help with chores before heading back to the bunkhouse at Westland Ranch. Sometimes they would ride into town together for supplies or community gatherings. Pendleton noticed. Clara became aware of the speculative glances, the knowing smiles when she and Caleb were seen together. Mrs. Patterson from the millinery shop began suggesting hat styles that would surely catch a certain cowboy's eye, while Mr. Jenkins at the general store started setting aside the best cuts of meat for Clara's Sunday dinners. "Does it bother you?" Caleb asked one evening as they walked back from a town social. The talk, Clara considered the question. 6 months ago it would have mortified her. Now she found she cared less about others' opinions. "People will always talk," she replied. "It's what they do in small towns." Caleb's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, his calloused palm warm against her skin. It was the first time he had touched her so deliberately, and Clara felt her pulse quicken at the contact. "I don't want to cause you any discomfort," he said softly. Clara looked up at him, his features illuminated by the rising moon. "You don't," she assured him, squeezing his hand lightly. Quite the opposite. That night, as Clara prepared for bed, she found herself standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection. At 28, she was no longer the fresh-faced girl who had married David with stars in her eyes, but neither was she the hollow-eyed widow of 6 months ago. There was color in her cheeks now, a brightness in her gaze that had been absent for too long. She thought of Caleb's hand in hers, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his laughter had begun to fill the empty spaces in her home. Was she ready for what might be developing between them? Was it too soon? As summer gave way to autumn, these questions persisted. Caleb continued his Sunday visits, but Clara sensed a growing tension not unpleasant, but charged with unspoken possibilities. He was careful never to overstep, always respectful of her space and her memories of David. Yet she could feel his affection in 100 small gestures, the way he listened attentively when she spoke, how he remembered details about her life before they met, his genuine interest in her sewing business. One crisp October afternoon, they rode together to check on the apple orchard. The trees David and Clara had planted were bearing fruit for the first time, their branches heavy with red and gold apples catching the autumn light. "He would be proud," Caleb said quietly as Clara reached up to touch one of the ripening fruits. "To see what you've maintained here." Clara nodded, unexpected tears pricking her eyes. "I almost gave up after he died, thought about selling and moving back east to my sister." Caleb dismounted and came to stand beside her. "What made you stay? Stubbornness, maybe," she replied with a small smile. "Or perhaps hope. That what we started here could still mean something." Caleb's gaze was warm as it met hers. "It means something, Clara. You've built something beautiful here." "We built it," she corrected gently. "David and I, and now—" She hesitated, then continued, "Now you've helped me keep it going." "I've been happy to," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "Being here with you these past months has meant more to me than I can say." Clara looked up at him, seeing the question in his eyes that he had been too respectful to ask. Taking a deep breath, she made a decision. "Caleb," she said softly, "I think it's time you stopped sleeping in the bunkhouse at Westlands." Surprise and hope flashed across his face. "Clara, are you saying—" "I'm saying," she continued, her heart pounding, "that there's a cabin on this property that's too big for just one person. And I'm tired of being alone." Caleb's hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "Are you sure? I don't want to rush you." Clara leaned slightly into his touch. "I'll always love David," she said honestly. "He was my first love, and part of my heart will always be his." "I would never ask you to forget him," Caleb assured her. "I know," Clara replied. "That's one of the reasons I've come to care for you, Caleb Grayson. You understand that loving again doesn't diminish what came before." The autumn light caught in his blue eyes as he looked at her with such tenderness that Clara felt her reservations melting away. "Clara Thompson," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I would be honored to share your home and your life if you'll have me." Instead of answering with words, Clara rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening as Caleb's arms came around her waist. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Clara felt as if something long dormant within her had finally awakened. "Is that a yes?" Caleb asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Clara nodded, returning his smile. "That's a yes." They gathered apples in companionable silence, the air between them charged with new possibilities. As they rode back to the cabin, Clara found herself imagining the future for the first time in over a year, not with dread or resignation, but with genuine anticipation. That evening, as they sat by the fire discussing plans for Caleb to move his belongings from the ranch, Clara felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't the life she had envisioned with David, but it was a good life nonetheless, one filled with second chances and new beginnings. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Clara smiled, watching the firelight play across his features. "About lamps in the darkness," she replied, "and how sometimes the light comes from unexpected places." Caleb's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. "I'm glad I found you that night, Clara Thompson." "So am I," she whispered, and in that moment she knew it was true. The news of Caleb Grayson taking up residence at Clara Thompson's homestead spread through Pendleton like wildfire. There were those who clucked their tongues at the impropriety, a widow of barely a year living with a man not her husband, but most of the town received the news with approval. Clara had been alone too long, they agreed, and Caleb was a hard-working, respectable man. Pastor Williams visited the homestead the week after Caleb moved in, his expression grave as he sat at Clara's kitchen table. "Miss Clara," he began formally, "I feel it's my duty as your pastor to discuss the arrangement you've entered into with Mr. Grayson." Clara poured him a cup of coffee, her movements calm despite her racing heart. "I appreciate your concern, Pastor, but Caleb and I have made our decision." The pastor sighed. "You understand that there are expectations of propriety, especially for a widow still in mourning." "With all due respect," Caleb said, entering from the barn where he'd been working, "Clara's mourning is her own business, not the town's." Pastor Williams looked between them, then nodded slowly. "I can see your minds are made up. In that case, I have a proposal. Let me marry you. Make this right in the eyes of God and the community." Clara and Caleb exchanged glances. They had discussed marriage, of course, but had agreed to give themselves time to adjust to living together before taking that step. "We're not opposed to marriage, Pastor," Clara said carefully. "But when we take those vows, it will be because we're ready, not because of town gossip." Pastor Williams studied them for a long moment, then surprised them both with a small smile. "David would be pleased, I think," he said quietly. "He always worried about you being alone, Clara. Spoke of it often during his illness." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes at this unexpected revelation. "He did," the pastor nodded. "He wanted your happiness above all else." He rose, placing his hat on his head. "When you're ready for those vows, you know where to find me." After he left, Caleb wrapped his arms around Clara, holding her as she processed the pastor's words. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Clara nodded against his chest. I never knew David had spoken to Pastor Williams about me, about after." Caleb pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "He loved you. Of course he would want you to find happiness again." That night, as they lay together in what had once been Clara and David's bed, she told Caleb about her husband's final days, the fever that had burned through him. His concern not for himself but for her, his final whispered, "I love you," before slipping away. "I felt so guilty," she confessed in the darkness, "for surviving when he didn't, for being here when he couldn't be." Caleb's hand found hers beneath the covers. "That's not what he would have wanted for you." "I know that now," Clara replied softly, "and I think he would have liked you, Caleb Grayson." Caleb's voice was thick with emotion when he responded. "That means more to me than you know." As winter settled over Pendleton, Caleb and Clara fell into the rhythms of shared life. He continued working at Westland Ranch during the day while she managed the homestead and her sewing business. Evenings were spent together by the fire, planning spring plantings, discussing improvements to the property, or simply enjoying each other's company. Clara found herself rediscovering joy in small moments: Caleb's sleepy smile first thing in the morning, his deep laugh when something amused him, the way he listened intently when she shared memories of her life before him. She began to understand that loving again didn't mean replacing what she had lost. It meant opening her heart to new possibilities. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere that Clara hadn't been able to appreciate the previous year, still deep in her grief. This year, she found herself looking forward to the holiday. She and Caleb cut a small pine from their property and decorated it with simple ornaments, some that she and David had made together, others that she created new with Caleb. On Christmas Eve, they attended the service at the small church in town. Clara was acutely aware of the glances cast their way, but found they bothered her less than before. Caleb sat beside her, his solid presence a comfort as Pastor William spoke of hope and renewal. After the service, they returned home through gently falling snow. The cabin glowed warmly in the darkness, lanterns lit in the windows, a beacon of welcome that Clara had maintained even during her darkest days. Inside, Caleb built up the fire while Clara prepared a simple supper. As they ate, she noticed he seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous. "Is everything all right?" she asked as they cleared the dishes. Caleb nodded, then reached for her hand. "I have something for you, a Christmas gift." "We agreed to wait until morning," Clara reminded him with a smile. "This one can't wait," he replied, leading her to sit by the fire. From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box hand-carved with delicate patterns of leaves and flowers. "Did you make this?" Clara asked, running her fingers over the intricate design. Caleb nodded. "Been working on it during lunch breaks at the ranch, but it's what's inside that matters." With slightly trembling hands, Clara opened the box. Nestled inside was a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," Caleb explained softly. "The only thing of hers I managed to keep through all my wanderings." Clara looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Clara Thompson," Caleb said, taking her hands in his, "these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. I know we agreed to wait, but I can't imagine my future without you in it." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Clara looked at the ring, then at the man kneeling before her, this man who had brought light back into her darkened life, who had helped her find joy again when she thought it impossible. "Yes," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Yes, Caleb Grayson, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. That night, as snow continued to fall outside, Clara lay in Caleb's arms, watching the firelight dance across the ceiling. She thought of how far she had come since that night nearly 6 months ago when a stranger had found her sewing in the darkness and lit a lamp that illuminated more than just her cabin. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb murmured, his voice heavy with approaching sleep. Clara turned to face him, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "About how sometimes the end of one chapter is just the beginning of another." Caleb caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "And this chapter, how does it look to you?" Clara smiled in the darkness. "Like the best one yet." Their wedding took place on a bright January day, with the mountains surrounding Pendleton gleaming white against a clear blue sky. The small church was filled with townsfolk who had come to witness Clara Thompson's second chance at happiness. Clara wore a dress of deep blue, not the traditional white of a first-time bride, but a color that spoke of depth and possibility. She had sewn it herself in the evenings by lamplight, with Caleb often sitting nearby, reading or carving while she worked. As Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Clara felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected. This marriage didn't erase what she had shared with David, rather, it honored the capacity for love that he had helped nurture in her. "Mrs. Grayson," Caleb whispered as they walked down the aisle together, testing the new name. "It has a nice sound to it," Clara replied, squeezing his arm. The community celebrated with them, hosting a reception at the town hall with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers, many of the same people who had comforted her after David's death now celebrating her new beginning. Mrs. Patterson, the milliner, pressed a package into Clara's hands. "A wedding gift," she explained. "Though it seems you've already received the best gift of all." She nodded toward Caleb, who was engaged in conversation with some of the Westland ranch hands. Clara unwrapped the package to find a beautiful lamp with a hand-painted glass shade depicting wildflowers. "It's lovely," she said, genuinely touched. Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Every home needs good light, dear, especially one filled with love." As the celebration continued into the evening, Clara found herself watching Caleb across the room, his easy laugh, the respectful way he spoke with the older ranchers, his gentle handling of the children who darted between the adults. He caught her eye and smiled, a private communication that made her heart flutter despite the crowd surrounding them. Later, as they drove home under a canopy of stars, Caleb asked, "Happy, Mrs. Grayson?" Clara leaned against his shoulder, savoring the warmth of him against the winter chill. "More than I thought possible a year ago." "I've been thinking," Caleb said, his arm tightening around her, "about the future, about expanding the orchard come spring, maybe adding to the house a bit." Clara smiled in the darkness. "I've been thinking about the future too." "Oh." Caleb glanced down at her. "What kind of thoughts?" Clara placed a hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "About filling that house with more than just the two of us. Someday." Caleb's breath caught and he reined the horses to a stop in the middle of the moonlit road. "Clara, are you saying?" She shook her head. "Not yet, but I'm open to the possibility now, with you." Caleb's kiss was gentle yet full of promise. When they finally continued their journey home, Clara felt as if they were truly embarking on a new path together, one illuminated not by a single lamp in the darkness, but by the steady light of shared dreams. Spring came to Pendleton in a riot of wildflowers and new growth. The Thompson, now Grayson homestead, flourished under Caleb and Clara's joint care. They expanded the orchard, added 2 milk cows to their small herd, and began renovations on the cabin, adding a second bedroom and enlarging the kitchen. Caleb had left his position at Westland Ranch to work their land full-time, a decision that brought both challenges and rewards. Money was tighter, but the satisfaction of building something together outweighed the financial concerns. Clara's sewing business continued to thrive. Word of her skill had spread beyond Pendleton, bringing orders from neighboring towns. She hired a young girl from town, Betsy Allen, to help with the simpler work, teaching her the finer points of dressmaking in the process. One warm May evening, as they sat on their expanded porch watching the sunset, Clara placed Caleb's hand on her still flat stomach. "I think," she said softly, "that we might need that second bedroom sooner than we planned." Caleb's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "Clara, are you certain?" She nodded, a mixture of excitement and trepidation filling her. "Dr. Morgan confirmed it yesterday. Come November, there will be 3 of us." Caleb's whoop of joy startled the chickens in the nearby yard. He lifted Clara from her chair and spun her around, his face alight with happiness. "Careful," she laughed, steadying herself against his chest when he set her down. "I'm in a delicate condition, or so they say." Caleb immediately became solicitous, guiding her back to her chair with exaggerated care. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can get you?" Clara smiled at his concern. "Just you, here with me." As her pregnancy progressed through the summer months, Clara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 2 years ago, she and David had still been trying for a child of their own. A year ago, she had been a grieving widow, sewing alone in the dark to save lamp oil and to keep her hands busy enough that she couldn't dwell on her loss. And now, here she was, married to a man who had quite literally brought light back into her life, expecting the child she had once thought might never come. "Do you ever wonder," she asked Caleb one night as they lay together, his hand resting protectively on her growing belly, "how different things might have been if your horse hadn't thrown that shoe that night?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. "I believe some things are meant to be, Clara. If not that night, perhaps another. Our paths were supposed to cross." Clara placed her hand over his. "I used to think my life was set on one path, that when David died, my chance for happiness died with him. And now," Caleb prompted gently, "now I understand that life isn't just one path. It's many paths intersecting, diverging, sometimes doubling back." She turned to face him in the dim light of their bedroom. "I'm grateful our paths crossed, Caleb Grayson." He kissed her softly. "As am I, Clara Grayson, as am I." November arrived with an early snow that blanketed Pendleton in white. Clara's time was near, and Dr. Morgan had taken to checking on her every few days. Caleb grew increasingly anxious, especially when the snow made travel between town and their homestead more difficult. "Perhaps we should move into town until the baby comes," he suggested as he stoked the fire one evening. Clara shook her head, her hands never ceasing their work on a tiny gown she was sewing. "This baby will be born at home, just as I was. Besides, Mrs. Westland has agreed to come stay when the time is near. She's delivered more babies than Dr. Morgan himself." Caleb looked unconvinced but didn't argue. He had learned in their months together that Clara's gentle demeanor masked a will of iron when she had made up her mind. 3 days later, in the pre-dawn hours of a snowy morning, Clara woke to the unmistakable tightening in her abdomen that signaled her time had come. "Caleb," she whispered, touching his shoulder, "it's starting." He was instantly awake, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Are you sure? Should I get Dr. Morgan?" "Mrs. Westland," Clara nodded, breathing through the contraction. "There's time yet, but yes, they should be fetched." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and anticipation. Caleb rode through the snow to bring back Mrs. Westland and Dr. Morgan, who arrived just as Clara's labor intensified. They shooed Caleb from the bedroom with instructions to keep water boiling and fresh linens ready. Pacing the cabin's main room, Caleb could hear Clara's occasional cries, despite her attempts to remain stoic. Each sound tore at his heart, making him feel helpless in a way he hadn't experienced since the war. "She's strong, your Clara," Mrs. Westland assured him during one of her brief emergences from the bedroom. "Doing beautifully." As the day waned and shadows lengthened across the snow outside, the cries from the bedroom changed in tenor, and then a new sound pierced the air. The strong, indignant wail of a newborn. Caleb froze mid-pace, his heart seeming to stop and then restart at double speed. A moment later, Dr. Morgan appeared in the doorway, his face tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Grayson. You have a son. A son." The words echoed in Caleb's mind as he was ushered into the bedroom. Clara lay propped against pillows, her face flushed and damp with sweat, her hair in disarray, and to Caleb, she had never looked more beautiful. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in the blanket she had spent months sewing and embroidering with tiny stars. "Come meet your son," she said softly, her voice weary but filled with wonder. Caleb approached the bed almost reverently, sitting carefully on its edge. Mrs. Westland adjusted the blanket, revealing a tiny red face with a surprising amount of dark hair. "He's perfect," Caleb whispered, reaching out to touch one miniature hand. The baby's fingers reflexively curled around his father's much larger one, and Caleb felt his eyes fill with unexpected tears. "What shall we call him?" Clara asked, watching the interplay between father and son. They had discussed names, of course, but had never quite settled on one. Looking at his son's face, Caleb knew with sudden certainty. "David," he said quietly. "David Caleb Grayson." Clara's eyes widened, then filled with tears of her own. "Are you sure?" Caleb nodded. "A good name from a good man. If our son grows to be half the man David Thompson was, and half the man I try to be, he'll do just fine in this world." Clara reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "David Caleb Grayson," she repeated, testing the name. "Welcome to the world, little one, Mrs." Westland and Dr. Morgan discreetly left the new family alone, promising to return the next day to check on mother and child. As darkness fell outside, Caleb lit every lamp in the cabin, filling their home with golden light. "What are you doing?" Clara asked, smiling tiredly from the bed where she nursed their son. "Making sure," Caleb replied, returning to her side, "that our son's first night in this world is filled with light. No darkness for him. Not tonight." Clara's smile deepened as she understood the significance of his gesture. "No darkness," she agreed, looking down at their child's peaceful face. "Only light from now on." The years that followed brought changes to the Grayson homestead and to Pendleton itself. The town grew as the railroad came through, bringing new settlers and opportunities. The Grayson orchard became known throughout the county for its quality apples, and Clara's sewing business expanded into a small but respectable dressmaking shop in town, managed mostly by Betsy Allen while Clara focused on her growing family. Young David thrived, growing into a sturdy boy with his mother's thoughtful nature and his father's adventurous spirit. When he was 3, a sister joined the family, Elizabeth Grace, named for both Caleb's and Clara's mothers. On a warm summer evening in 1885, nearly 10 years after Caleb had first found Clara sewing in the darkness of her cabin, the Graysons hosted a gathering to celebrate the completion of their expanded home and the harvest of their first commercial apple crop. The homestead was transformed for the occasion. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting a magical glow over the orchard where tables had been set up for the feast. Nearly everyone from Pendleton had come, along with buyers from as far away as Portland who had contracted for the Grayson apples. As twilight deepened, Clara found a quiet moment alone on the porch of what had once been a lonely widow's cabin, and was now the heart of a thriving family home. From her vantage point, she could see Caleb in the orchard, David perched on his shoulders while Elizabeth danced around them, her dark curls bouncing with each step. "They're wonderful children," came a voice beside her. Clara turned to find Mrs. Patterson, now quite elderly but still sharp-eyed, watching the scene. "They are," Clara agreed with a mother's pride. Mrs. Patterson patted her hand. "I remember when you used to come into town after David passed. So pale, so withdrawn. I worried for you, dear." Clara nodded, acknowledging the truth of the observation. "I couldn't see beyond my grief then. And now look at you," the older woman said with satisfaction. "A fine husband, beautiful children, a prosperous business. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" "It does indeed," Clara replied, watching as Caleb caught sight of her and waved, his smile visible even from a distance. After the guests had departed and the children were tucked into bed, Clara and Caleb sat together on the porch swing he had built the previous summer. The night was warm, filled with the sounds of crickets and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. "Happy?" Caleb asked, his arm around her shoulders. Clara leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "Completely." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I was thinking," Caleb said eventually, "about that first night when I found you sewing in the dark." Clara smiled at the memory. "I was trying so hard to be practical, to make what little I had last. And I barged in with my broken-down horse and lit up your carefully rationed lamp oil," Caleb chuckled. "Best waste of lamp oil I ever experienced," Clara replied, turning to look at him in the soft glow from the porch lantern. After all these years, she still found herself struck by his handsome features, now more weathered but no less dear to her. The laugh lines around his eyes had deepened, and threads of gray had appeared at his temples, but he was still the man who had brought light back into her darkened world. "You know," she continued thoughtfully, "I've come to believe that sometimes what seems like an ending is really just a pause between chapters." Caleb nodded, understanding her meaning. "David's chapter in your life was important, but it wasn't the only chapter." "No," Clara agreed softly. "And this chapter, Caleb Grayson, our chapter, has been more beautiful than I could have imagined." Caleb's kiss was as tender as it had been on their wedding day, filled with the depth of feeling that had grown between them through shared joys and sorrows, through the building of a life together. When they parted, Clara rested her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. From inside the house came the soft sounds of their children sleeping, and before them stretched the orchard David Thompson had helped her plant, and Caleb Grayson had helped her nurture, a living symbol of how love could grow from loss, how light could emerge from darkness. "I think," Clara murmured, "this might be my favorite chapter yet." Caleb's arm tightened around her. "The best part is, my love, there are still many chapters to come." As they sat together in the gentle night, Clara thought of all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment, the grief that had nearly consumed her, the chance encounter that had changed everything, the courage it had taken to open her heart again. The path had not been straight or easy, but it had led her here to this porch, this night, this man, this life filled with love and purpose and above all light. And in the end, isn't that what every good story is about? Not the absence of darkness, but the presence of light. Not the avoidance of endings, but the courage to begin again. For Clara Grayson, what had begun as a simple act, a cowboy lighting a lamp in a darkened cabin, had illuminated not just a room, but a future filled with possibilities she had once thought forever lost. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that even in our darkest moments, light can find its way in, if only we have the courage to let it.